Good afternoon, Bitcoiners. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're doing well. I'm loving life, doing much better, doing much better. I'm glad you're all here. Karina, so happy to see this, Nolan. We've missed you. I've missed you guys. I've missed you guys. LOL, Tony, for sure we will. I don't know what Tony said. I don't get all the messages, as you know. They get filtered out. I've got there's some folks that are right here. They're friends of mine. They're going to be taking off in a second. They're just planning a trip. Chat, puppy, monkey, baby, GPT. We love your name. Hey, Nolan. Hey, how's it going? I'm going to have trouble saying your name again. Chat, puppy, monkey, baby, GPT. Welcome back, Count. Thanks, West Coast Boots. And a good afternoon to you, good sir. Did I say good morning or did I say good afternoon, Bitcoiners? Yeah, it's a cigar. We're doing a little different. We're doing things a little different. We're imbibing poisonous things today. I haven't done any of this since my father passed, so I'm just going to have one beer in his honor. He loved the beer. He loved the tobacco. We're going to do a little beer, a little tobacco, you know, just to get in the vibe, just to get connected. Super beautiful photo of you and your dad. Thanks, Bitcoin Dev. Yeah, that was taken U.S. Thanksgiving. He came around for Thanksgiving weekend. That's in Montreal, but we celebrate the U.S. version of the holiday, so I insisted my dad come, and he was there. That was back in November. Welcome back. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you. Nolan and fam, God bless. Indeed. Good afternoon, Christine. I'm glad you made it. Christine. I'm glad you made it. All right. We are definitely going to acknowledge you got a lot of brightness back there, right? We got a lot of brightness back there. So the sun is up. It's about to set. You might get a little bit of a show. You might get a little bit of colors. I was hoping you'd get colors. I didn't realize it'd be this washed out. You're getting the sun on the water right now, but you might get a really good sunset. So I'm hoping we'll have a nice dramatic sunset behind us because it's happening over the next hour, and we'll see how it goes. Let me get the mic closer to me. Enmity says, good morning. I'm actually having coffee for once. Yeah, we've switched it this day. So indeed, let's just acknowledge the sun is setting, but it's around, right? We got a sunrise. It's around, and Bitcoin's running. So all that's left to do is have, in this case, a beer and talk about what's new. We're also going to have a little bit of our cigar, right? Give us some tobacco motivation. And we got to start with some Moscow time, right? We can't avoid Moscow time. What are you going to do, right? We can't do this without Moscow time to start. And we'll move into our theme after Moscow time. But I just took a little look before I came on to find out what was going on. And we got a couple good ones here. This is from the Washington Post. They say Lunchables under fire after reports of concerning lead and sodium levels. Feed your kids some lead. Good idea. Oh, but in case it's, you know, you're going to groceries where you buy the lead, right? You go buy lead at the grocery store these days. That's where you get it. But it turns out Business Insider is letting us know that millennials and Gen Z's trendy new splurge. It's groceries. That's their trendy new splurge. They love it. You had some data today on the inflation, of course, yesterday, right? And Politico had a pretty good story. Stubborn inflation reigns on Biden's good news parade, right? That's what we found out. Hotter than expected inflation report likely means the president will have to deal with higher interest rates on the campaign trail. He just said he was going to definitely lower them, though. So, because we got a president who calls Fed policy, right? That just came out today. So we got more, though. Again, we're doing the poison substances in honor of our father, who more or less died of these poisons. So we gotta just acknowledge them, right? I got this one too. This is an oldie but a goodie. This comes from 2020. This was actually written in a newspaper. I don't know. I saw it today and just had to bring it. Singing happy birthday could spread COVID-19 because the enunciation of B's and P's releases large droplets, which may be infectious. Happy birthday. The B's and the P's. Don't say B's and P's, guys, you know. Speaking of B's and P's, this is another from the Mail, right? From the Daily Mail. Star of sitcom Blackish claims Trump will put black people in camps if he's reelected and says This motherfucker is Hitler. It was a pretty good one if you haven't seen the video. It was really good. Oh, this one's another one from the Daily Mail. You know, the Daily Mail is one of the best ones there is, right? It really is good. Here's what we got. How about this? Now, this is from today. Oh, no, from April 5th. We missed this one. All right, ready? Now, scientists say wearing jeans is bad for the environment. Study reveals wearing a pair just once is the equivalent of driving a car for 6.5 miles. Imagine you did your math like this, you know? Driving a car, I'm going to measure everything by CO2, and my jeans and my car are going to be measured in CO2. It's perfect. Let them do it. We love it. This one's pretty good. This is from The Independent. How climate change is hitting vulnerable Indonesian trans sex workers. It's a big problem. It's a really big problem. This one's good. UC Berkeley accused of systemic racism after banning white people from California Community Farm, co-owned by the university, on Saturdays. That's pretty good. Pretty good. Not bad, huh? Not bad. And we got this one. This one's pretty good too. Scotland made it an imprisonable offense to stir up hatred against some groups, including trans people. J.K. Rowling and Elon Musk are among those voicing concerns. Really good. Bitcoin Deb says, Levi Strauss is rolling in his grave. Yeah, he was a cool guy. He was a cool guy. Hey, Nolan, first time to catch you live. Awesome, JP. We love it. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Isabella, you have tons of viewers over in Isla Majores. Isabella, that's good news. I'm glad you're one of my viewers. You're the most important one over there. We're happy. And congratulations, Isabella, to your appointment to, what's it called? I saw that it just got started. I can't remember the name. I just saw you got appointed to that the other day. Congratulations. Congratulations. Look it up. A few years ago, some rag said to wear jeans to save the environment. I believe that. I believe that, Noxotl. That's true. The world is bonkers. Indeed, it is, Bitcoin Deb. So, you know, one of the reasons why I do these Moscow Times things to start the show is because I really do think laughing at Clown World is the best thing we can do. And it's kind of a dad joke aspect, right? We do a lot of dad jokes, and I've done a bunch of shows in the morning about how laughter is one of the best things we can do with respects to Clown World, and to really create that contrast between fiat and Bitcoin. And that's really what this show is all about. It's all about contrasting the psychological engines that move fiat forward with the psychological engine that we enjoy as Bitcoiners. And now I've been thinking quite a bit over the past few days. Just a second. John, you're loud, man. You're loud. You're coming through. The global audience is saying, who's that Bajan guy? What's that voice?
Say hi.
That was my neighbor for many years, John. He's a great guy. He's planning a trip here to a couple of the islands, so around. But he's from here. He's a super fella, and we love him. He was friends with my dad. He knew my dad. So here's the thing. When we talk about dad jokes and things like that, you know, I was using that. See ya. I was thinking about what I'm going to write next. You know, I just published the Bitcoiner's Guide to the US 2024 elections. That comes after I published the Bitcoiner's Guide to NPC management. So what I've done with these two books is to really give folks a guidebook to orange pill people and not take the typical approach of, you know, they have an information problem, or they just need to hear that Bitcoin fixes economic policy, and if they just know more about macroeconomics, then they'll love Bitcoin, and if they just understand how the system works today, then they'll understand Bitcoin. And you know, the people who don't get Bitcoin by now, it's not an information problem. They're NPCs, right? They're NPCs. So you got to deal with them in a different way. That's why I use prompt engineering and all these techniques. So if you're interested in more of that, you know, we do that on the show. We do that every morning. We have the 2 books on it. But today we're going to talk about something a little different, but it's still in the realm of this psychological engine. It's still in the realm of Bitcoin psychology contrasted with fiat psychology. And today, and I think this is the next book I'm going to be publishing is the Bitcoiner's Guide to Sovereignty. And through understanding this sovereignty, everyone has a different path towards sovereignty. So it's sort of like a condensed version of the sovereign individual. And the way I'm charting it is through using archetypes, so Jungian archetypes. So not every Bitcoiner's path to sovereignty is the same, right? We all kind of take different routes. Not every Bitcoiner is the same. And there are multiple ways that a Bitcoiner can reach this sort of self-actualization and personal sovereignty from the state and everything else that we aspire to as Bitcoiners. And part of that is to come up with this sort of framework. And there are certain archetypes that Bitcoiners have already recognized. And one of the biggest ones, so the jester is the one we're talking about now, with the reason we do Moscow Time and the reason we think Clown World is so funny and the reason why not getting angry and not arguing with them is so effective. The reason why prompt engineering and mocking them is the important step. Because remember, when I describe prompt engineering of the fiat NPCs in the Bitcoiner's Guide to the US 2024 elections, I really talk about specifically how you mock NPCs. Now, it's a dangerous thing to mock them and you must mock them. But I talk about the technique of mocking them and that you really have to be able to mock them at a psychological level that they almost can't perceive, right? Because if it's straight up just mean mocking, like you're fat or you're stupid or something like that, it doesn't always work. Have fun staying poor can work in certain contexts. But in general, you got to find a way to penetrate their defenses. And one of the ways you can penetrate those defenses is if it's almost like they have to squint to perceive that they're being mocked. And the uncertainty about whether or not they're the butt of the joke, or if I'm laughing at them by exaggerating and amplifying and totally embracing some concept like voting for Joe Biden 5 times, or having the least intelligent president is actually the goal, or running the money printer super duper hot because why not, right? All those farcical, extreme, satirical things that I put in the book that really do persuade people. You've got to do it at a level where they can't kind of perceive it. So the mocking is really part of this sort of jester archetype. And the jester is a really important archetype when we're in these periods of transitions, right? Mocking these people. Sweeties, this isn't a good place for you today. I'm doing a YouTube show right now. YouTube? Yeah, I'm doing a YouTube show. Some friends of my kids have come around to eat their ice cream here. That's why we don't do the show normally in the afternoon here. And when we do it in the morning, it's pretty quiet, but that's okay. If you guys have patience, I'm happy to do it here. So when we think about these archetypes, the jester is a big one. The jester is a really prominent and important Jungian archetype when it comes to these periods of transition, right? It's the reason why jesters existed in courts. It's the reason why comedy is such an important factor in what we're up to here, changing the world and separate money and state. And being able to have that contrast and inducing humor is one of our best weapons, right? That's what Moscow Time is literally all about. That's why I try not to write any punchlines, because fiat is able to produce a situation where reality and absurdity are blended. They're the same thing. That's kind of how mocking works in this case. And that's why you can resonate your mocking of NPCs at this level in a way that they don't really know you're joking. And that's kind of the point, right? But that's not the only archetype, right? Fatherhood in general, just being a dad, is one of the major archetypes of Jungian psychology, and one of the most important ones we can consider when we think about our different paths. So my thesis is kind of like this, that we've got these different archetypical paths that each individual Bitcoiner can take, all of which lead to sovereignty, any of which are good, right? There isn't a correct road, but there's one that might be correct for you. So fatherhood is one of them. And in my case, it's kind of one of the things that started both Bitcoin, right? Satoshi doing what he did. So Satoshi sacrificing in the way he did and leaving the project and doing the necessary sacrifice, kind of the dad thing, doing the right thing, is one of the major archetypes of Bitcoin. It's one of the things that separates Bitcoin from any other coin, that the person who did it used an almost Christ-like, right? Of course, when we think of that sacrifice and father, that Christ is the greatest archetype of that sacrifice and what the father is willing to do in order to have growth and in order to see their offspring grow. Now, one of the things that Satoshi did by making this necessary sacrifice is really laid the foundation for this dad archetype to be at the heart of the movement, right? You can't exactly call like Vitalik a dad archetype, although Vitalik's dad is an amazing guy, by the way. Vitalik's dad, who I've hung out with a bunch of times, is one of the coolest guys you're ever going to meet. And you can understand once you meet him kind of how Vitalik made it, right? Once you understand his dad is jacked as if he's a wrestler in the WWE. I mean, jacked, right? Like you, I'm telling you he's jacked and you're saying, oh, he's kind of big. He's bigger than you think, right? He's bigger than whatever you have in your mind right now. Look him up one day. You can find pictures of him online. He's a pretty neat guy. So, when you think about this sacrifice and priority, I know in my case, had I not had an example of a father in the way that I had my father, in the way that my father was, I would have never found Bitcoin. And it was for a number of things, right? My dad already in the 1980s sort of predicted this. He's a true altruist. Yeah. And Bitcoin Dev, the way I think about this, the whatever million Bitcoins that supposedly are Satoshis that he mined in the early days and never touching them and walking away and not claiming it, that really is to have that sort of moral authority that there is some kind of the creator of the network walked away and didn't profit from it, which is a more powerful psychological persuasive tool than you could ever imagine, right? And that's why it's used and cited so frequently. That's why the issuance of Bitcoin and the way that it was issued is so mythologically important, right? Because it really hits on that archetype of the necessary sacrifice in order to, in this case, lend credibility to the system. So it's sort of fused with Bitcoin, this archetype, from the very beginning. And from there, you can, of course, tell all the educators that came out of Bitcoin immediately, right? Andreas Antonopoulos using that educator archetype, which is really a track of the father archetype, right? They don't have to be your actual progeny in order to blend into that archetype. So that's a big one, right? And you see that as a path that Bitcoiners already have, that when you hear fathers out there stacking sats and making necessary sacrifices for their family, it's the long-term thinking thing. It's the switch in time preference. It's the switch in psychological frame. And a lot of that has to do with that dad archetype. Now, going back to my own case and to talk about my own father for a second, one of the most amazing things my dad did for me, and that wasn't obvious at the beginning, my dad sort of predicted this recalibration of priorities on a social level, right? He kind of understood that we were headed away from city life. He didn't have Bitcoin in order to guide his course, and he was probably 30 years too early. But already in the 1980s, my dad said, this city thing, this is dumb. I'm not doing it, right? I'm going to take my kid to the countryside, which is where I was raised. So I was raised in a small community, and my dad gave up the entire city life for this countryside life that really benefited me mostly, right? For him, you're a little, he had to accept sort of a lot less money in life. And we'll talk about that stuff in a second, but he really did make a sacrifice for the betterment of my own life. Now, one of the most amazing things happened to me in the little village that I grew up in. So the village I grew up in, you can get a sense of it if you go on Amazon and watch the show. I think it's called Three Pines or something like that. It's a detective still murder mystery thing. Weirdly written by the same writer that co-wrote Hillary Clinton's latest book about a murder in the White House. So this lady is from my hometown, and she sort of mythologize the town itself in the story. Now, the town is a unique place. It's a very wealthy community on the Vermont border with Quebec, on the Quebec side and Lake Country. And because it's only about an hour from Montreal, it has a real Hamptons kind of vibe. So lots of prime ministers live there. Lots of bank heads live there. Sort of all my life, I knew the heads of all the Canadian banks because they all lived in that village. And it was a really great experience for me because instead of living in this crazy urban environment or suburban environment, I grew up as a poor kid in the country, but in a weird town that gave me all kinds of incredible access to super rich people, super successful people who I could study close up and model. And that was really part of my father's design, right? There was things he knew he couldn't teach me. My dad never finished high school, right? So he never finished high school. And through understanding enough about the world. Now, at the same time, one of the neat things that happened to him over there is that even though I grew up, weirdly, all of my friends who didn't really have dads in their life or enough dads in their life all started hanging out with him. So in a strange way, for the rest of my life, from when I left as a teenager, because if you're from Quebec, you kind of have to move out really early, or for an English kid in a rural area like me, when you're 16, you finish high school, and if you don't know how to move to the city and get a job and all that, fuck you, you're done, right? I was able to do that, one of the people who could do that. But every time I would go home, forever, up until recently, and even now getting messages from people, I would go home and my high school friends or my childhood friends would just be on my porch. My dad had a beautiful porch. He built the whole house himself. He was very good with his hands. And I would have friends, my best friends, and not one or two, like all the friends I had over my lifetime. I would come home and there they would be on the porch, not once or twice, all the time. All the time. His best friends, even until recently, were my high school friends. He was friends in the same way with my brother's high school friends. So he had this really neat, and they all sought him out for the same thing. When they became fathers, or if they didn't have a father, it was always about just dad advice, right? He was really good at that and really helpful, right? So that's one archetype. Now, I'll even give you the most important lesson he ever taught me, right? The most important lesson he ever taught me within this dad archetype, the thing he was most proud about, and the thing us Bitcoiners sitting here talking the way we are, the thing he was most proud about in his life is that he never, and he would say it like this, I never owned an alarm clock. He never owned an alarm clock his entire life, ever, right? Never owned an alarm clock, ever. and he would say, I never owned an alarm clock. And it was a pretty neat thing, right? To think like that, and to think that that's what you should aspire to. Not necessarily popular in the 80s or 90s, but we'll talk about that a little more when you get to the point that we're at now in the world. It's a very good thing, right? You'll see he's kind of a fiat survivor, a survivor of the fiat apocalypse, which is where these archetypes fit in and into apocalyptic and times of change frames, right? So it's a really important one. Now, going back to his job, he was also, and this is a really important archetype, just a creator, right? The creator. He was a person who worked with his hands and wasn't part of this financial engineering laptop job, meaningless work. He really built things. His original creative job when I was young, when we lived in the city and he made good money, was a window dresser. So he dressed some of the best windows in the main part of Montreal. He sort of launched Le Chateau and Aldo and a lot of the fashion boutiques in town, and it was a neat thing, right? And he did that right up until the 90s. So when we first moved to the country, he would commute, which was great for me. I had a really neat thing, and within this creator world, because of that, because he was doing this thing where he would think of a cool window, and he had to go to all the neat malls in Toronto and Ottawa and Montreal and Quebec City. And he would regularly just say, hey, you want to come today? Right. So whenever I got to go with my dad to work, it would be to some mall somewhere. It was always fun. And I would see what he would build. He would always make it out of things in nature, bushes and brush and leaves and whatever. He would find cool things and really make these beautiful windows that really stopped people, and they would look and say, wow, that's neat. Right. So, but when he moved to the country and he started to not be that interested in fashion and didn't really want to do the driving anymore, he started building furniture with bendable willows. So he started building wicker chairs and wicker arbors and really neat furniture and garden type things. And this worked in the area we live in because we have really beautiful gardens everywhere that people will spend a fortune on to make beautiful. And it was a neat job. And he was able to go into that field. And that's one of the important archetypes that I'll put in my book too, where you're starting to see a lot more people in Bitcoin from that creative class background, from that world of writing books and creating, in my case, science fiction stories. But you're seeing it with the ordinals, you're seeing it with the JPEG folks, you're seeing it with the creators who have been around from the early days of Pepe, right? So there has been a world where artists and creators use Bitcoin. I don't know the right way to do it, and I'm sure there's a million ways that are wrong, but nevertheless, this archetype is going to be one that I want to focus on, and it's one that I think is a path towards sovereignty for Bitcoiners. So remember the frame, if you're just arriving, I see a lot more people have arrived from the beginning. what I'm going through here is some of the archetypes that I think are relevant in order for you to reach pure sovereignty, the kind of sovereignty we hear described in the sovereign individual, and using Bitcoin and leveraging Bitcoin to get there. And there's a few different ones, right? Everyone's path to sovereignty isn't just having so much Bitcoin that you're free, right? It's not quite enough. There's different archetypical paths you can take that involve their own pathways of evolution that you can mark and track. And that's really what these archetypes are. These archetypes are really to help you model the process of individuation, which is really what Jungian psychology is about, right? Which is all about encountering your shadow and merging with that shadow and assimilating that shadow and learning the lessons that you need to learn in order to evolve and advance and move forward, right? And that's one of the neat things that Bitcoin does draw us all to, is that it becomes this really good process for encounter, right? When you think of encounter, you need to be able to count. And one of the things that Bitcoin has given us at a societal level, one of the things that is this feeling how much things actually cost, having true price discovery and true market costing because of the money itself as a better measuring tool, doesn't allow us to spin out of control, which is really what's going on with fiat, right? What we're seeing here is the shadow not encountered on a societal level. That's where the breakdown is coming from. This is a archetypical breakdown of the Jungian shadow. It can be on an individual level, but we're experiencing it psychologically as a culture. That's why you see all this mental illness everywhere. Mental illness is what comes from denying your shadow and not going through the process of individuation, right? Now, Bitcoiners can also avoid the process of individuation. That's why these archetypes are helpful. These archetypes help you combine, perceive what you need to encounter, perceive what you need to merge with, perceive what you need to assimilate along your own path in order to realize your own sovereignty in the end. Enlightenment and sovereignty in the world of Bitcoin are almost the same thing. In the same way that absurdity and reality have merged in fiat, enlightenment, almost being the opposite of absurdity, is what we're seeing merging in the Bitcoin archetypical world, right? So now that's not, we're going to cover Mother, for example. That's another really important archetype. And in fact, the one that killed my dad in the end, right? My father really died of heart disease, but really the true story is a few years ago in the 2000s, total alcoholic, not a morning, noon, and night drinker, but drinking beer every day type of thing. Couldn't tell me. And weirdly, he had all of the rebellious instinct that I needed to perceive Bitcoin early. Had it not been for him, I would never have been able to have the skills to understand what was going on in the first place to perceive it. But weirdly, he still believed the fiat nonsense about medicine and all this stuff. He just couldn't get his mind around it. So it's hard for everyone, even people who are sort of renegades and all that. So Mother Outlaw is one thing that I'm definitely going to be talking about. And that's really where this nutrition stuff comes from. That's where Bitcoiners are starting to perceive a lot more about our own personal health and what's important. And not only that, family values and honoring mothers who really invest all of their time into the health and psychological happiness of their physical home space and their children's psychological happiness. This is a big theme in Bitcoin, and one will embrace in this story, right? Muslim Bitcoiner, assalamu alaikum. May you all have a blessed day, including my shitcoiners, no coiners, and boomers. It is, in fact, Eid Mubarak, the end of Ramadan, if I'm not mistaken, right? So we've got, the jester, the trickster, right? That's one of the big ones. That's why we do Moscow time, laughing at fiat, really important archetype in Bitcoin. We see them all over the space, right? We've got plenty of tricksters, plenty of people playing pranks. I did an interview yesterday with Walker, the Bitcoin couple that do all the fun videos, right? He's got his campaign out there to stop the presses, New York Times, and all the environmental abuse that goes on with printing a newspaper, right? This is trickster stuff, right? This is the archetype of the trickster, a fellow Walker who just became a dad, right? So you can mix these archetypes. You don't have to pick one, right? They can be a blend of all of them, different parts of all of them. But here you see a great example of a trickster and then the father piece added to it. Again, creator is a big archetype that I think I'll be covering, and you can see all the different ways people have been able to both have a career in Bitcoin, but also find their own sovereignty and find their own enlightenment by embracing these archetypes, right? So we've got jester, trickster, father, creator, mother. Another one that's really important, and this is, again, related to my dad, who I just mentioned, was so adamant about being a rebel about some. One of the really important archetypes for Bitcoiners is the outlaw, is the person who simply won't conform with the types of laws that are being written in this fiat corrupt system. Now, one of the things that at the end of his life, I've got to be proud about my dad is he never even filed his taxes. Never. His whole life. Never. Not once. Ever. Never did it. Never. Zero. Never had a bank account in his whole life. I'm telling you, he got a bank account recently when he retired because he couldn't receive the small like public pension check that you get in Canada. So he had to create one for that. But otherwise, my dad made it the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, and the 2000s before he came to retirement age with zero. They don't even know he exists. Nothing as a passport, and that's it. That is it. Now, to me as a kid, this was like, like you don't really know. But now, as I sit here as a Bitcoiner, I would never have been able to do the stuff that I did. I would have never had the confidence to jump into Bitcoin the way I did had he not been on that plank before me, had he not explained to me what a scam all this stuff was from a very early age. I mean, a very early age, and not in an anger way. He was never one of these free men, fuck society guys. He lived like a normal guy. He would go here and there and just never brought it up with people, right? Never had any of those social benefits, but didn't need them, right? Didn't have a healthcare card until just recently in Canada. None of it. I mean, none of it, right? Just a complete undocumented Canadian. He was born in Germany. So, going next to so outlaw, a really important thing. Again, my dad, basically never followed any rules. In my own lifetime, understand this, as I'm a teenager, right? As I'm a teenager, my parents didn't come home one night. They were out in Montreal. They had snuck into a Bob Dylan concert when I'm like 15 or something. They were grandparents already. They were already grandparents sneaking into Bob Dylan concerts, right? Anywhere you went with them, it was trouble, right? They were always talking and making friends with everybody and causing all kinds of wildness, right? They were a lot of fun. And now, never too much fun, right? They were very responsible people. Again, my father and outlaw is one way to put it, right? And I think this is the tension that he was able to embrace, and the reason for which so many of my friends, rich friends whose dads were multi-million. You got to understand the town I come from. Very rich people, right? My best friend growing up, his dad was a French psychoanalyst. Of course, divorced, right? The mother had another rich husband, some Greek shipping guy. And sure enough, this guy spent most of his summers in France all summer. This kid, nice cars, nice house, nice houses. His dad had to move the factory because Canada started having a trade embargo against Haiti, or sanctions against Haiti or something in the 90s. And so he had to move to the United States. He had to move to Vermont. So just across the border. We kept in touch until the end of high school, but I didn't see much about him again for the rest of the 90s. And then he showed up at the end of the 90s, just before I moved to France to go to college. And we had a good time. But within a few weeks, he ended up in a mental institute. And from the mental institute, he called my dad, right? Like, I need help. I'm in big trouble. I don't know what's going on. I want to kill myself. So you got to imagine this is a kid who had a dad who was an actual psychoanalyst, like an actual fake news psychoanalyst from France, right? Some bullshit psychoanalyst. And, this kid called my dad when he was in the psych ward for help, right? Now, the reason is it's not just that my dad was this father thing, and it's not just that he was the outlaw. He balanced that tension in a great way to fall into, another archetype that Bitcoiners, I think, can embrace, and is a big part of our pathway towards our own individual sovereignty, which is the hero archetype, one of our most important ones, right? And in his case, the way I see this hero archetype in his what he did, this is a guy who was born in Germany, right? So my father is born just after World War II, at the very north of Germany on the Danish border, in an area that never really got fucked from the war. It just kind of got forgotten about. So he's actually the inheritor of this old German family lifestyle. He lived there till he was 8. He had all of his grandparents, great-grandparents. Everybody was around except his own one grandfather ended up in a thing because he was Jewish, semi-Jewish. So, there was all that. But this idea that he actually was able to have a non-traumatized German family after the war, one that really did prioritize their children and family life and all that stuff. So he had a very close family. They moved to America and he got involved with the whole hippie 60s thing. And that's where a lot of this outlaw stuff came from. But here's the frame for hero that I think is really important, and one that I think Bitcoiners already have an important stake to, which is the hero frame. Now, what he survived was the fiat apocalypse. Think about it, right? This is a guy who grew up in Germany at the end of the war, came to America, lived through all of these amazing changes in America that we've understood now had a lot to do with psychological manipulation and persuasion and brainwashing and all of that stuff. You want this, get this, right? He did not go for any of it and didn't fall for any of it, and spent his life as a survivor of some of what fiat did to families and what it did to institutions and small towns and that kind of lifestyle. So he came from this German background, and he moved to one of the only places you're going to find in North America that hasn't been affected by this, where people do have roots. Where I live in the Eastern Townships, people know me, people know him. It's a small town, and because it's a small town, you're connected to the whole everything, right? They know, my parents knew everybody, my dad knew everybody, and he was able to survive everything that went wrong in the world because of fiat. He never allowed it to change his perception. My father gained most happiness and taught me to do this, that you got to take pleasure in just, no matter how much money you have and all that stuff, even over the past couple of years, you got to be entertained by cats. You got to be entertained by birds. You got to be entertained just by the world around you. It's not about chasing the dopamine. It's not about any of these things. Now, he had a million faults. He liked the scratch tickets, but for entertainment, he couldn't sit through a movie. Hadn't watched TV in 20 something years, except sports. He loved the sports ball stuff, right? He would be watching the Masters this weekend 100%. He loved golf and baseball and hockey and all that stuff. But this is a person, like I said, who, never had an alarm clock, but he never let the shame of not being rich and driving a shitty car and all that stuff bug him. He never let it bug him. And if you don't let that stuff bug you, and you can live your life and you can make it this far through fiat, and your actual measurement of your success is you never owned an alarm clock and you spent all that time with your family, just look at the position he's in now, right? He died with kids who are happy and healthy, with grandkids who are all happy and healthy, with a family mourning him and missing him and wishing they could see him again. But he had no money, right? He died. I think he died in the end with I don't know, my mom just took the money out to pay for his cremation. It was just enough to cover it, right? So he died. He didn't get divorced. He stayed, the wife and him and all that stuff, my mom, all of it was exactly as the old days. So he was able to survive all of this stuff and come out on the other end in something that Bitcoiners would recognize as not an NPC, not a fiat sludge person, right? And he was able to have a million unique conversations in his life that a lot of people remember, because they were those kinds of conversations that not everyone's willing to have, right? People are a little afraid to have. But he was over the shame of talking about God or whatever. He didn't care. It never bothered him. So he was able to talk about this stuff and talk deeply about politics. This is a guy, even in my own school life, for example, right? That he would wait. If I went to bed late, like there was a baseball game on or something when I was a senior, he'd come down and say, "Do you want to go to school today?" He never asked me for my he never asked me for my report card. He never told me to do homework. He never did any of that stuff. If I felt like going skiing one day, I could say, I'm not going to school today. I'm going to go skiing. Oh, Dad, can I go to the city with you? I got some stuff to do, right? No problem. There was no bedtime, no nothing. No, can I go out? Can I do this? Can I do that? None of it, right? He just sort of had confidence. Now, he did put a lot of pressure on me, but not in results in school, which I had anyway. So he never had to worry about it. I was a great student. But he put his focus on my own education, on having a good vocabulary, not sounding stupid. He never let me say like. You know what a benefit it is. Now he never finished high school. Imagine that. But you know what he never let in my house? Like. I mean, if I tried that shit, he'd tell me, "Well, you sound like a stupid girl." All right, not to be a jerk, but that's what he would say. Right? He would say, "You sound like an idiot." And he was the same when it came to my French, right? So he put a lot of pressure on me as a kid to speak French perfectly. And it was a weird thing to put pressure on someone to do. And most English people in the 90s were like, stupid fucking French, right? It was a big advantage for me later on in life. I would have never made it anywhere had I not had that. I would have never been able to live in France. I got one of the biggest scholarships you can get in Canada. I think the biggest scholarship you can get in Canada for law school, and that was because of him, right? Because my French was good enough, I could go to law school in French, and so he, did a lot that was not obvious. It wasn't the obvious choice for education, but it helped me integrate with all of these rich people I knew and not to be a shithead, because that's the kind of thing that's going to make you sound stupid if you can't express yourself. And in the case of where I come from in Canada, even all these rich English people speak perfect French. I mean, perfect. Where I'm from in my town, the English people can probably speak better French than most French people. So not because they use it every day, just because their parents force them to learn, and that's a thing that happens to not a little bit rich Canadian families, very rich Canadian families. The billionaire families, their kids speak perfect French, right? That's just. It would be like not teaching them how to sail, right? They must speak perfect French. So that's a big part of it. So the hero thing really is a real archetype for us Bitcoiners, and surviving the fiat apocalypse is one of the things that's in front of all of us to do at present, one of the things that we're focused on. And one of the reasons why hero archetype is something that we can really chart for Bitcoiners. Is one of our options in order to reach this sort of individuation as Bitcoiners, right? We see it every day, right? So finally, the last archetype, and one that I think is also really important, right? So I'll go over them all just so we can lead up to why it's important. But you get the jester, right? The jester, we talked about that first. That's laughing at clown world. That's why we do Moscow time. Father itself, taking necessary sacrifices, the foundation that Satoshi laid for us all. Creator, of course, people trying to do amazing things with Bitcoin and find new ways for people to embrace Bitcoin because there's stuff happening. And that, you can be the canvas of creation goes even into trading technology and scaling technology and all that stuff. That's all a part of it as far as I can tell. Mother is a big one. Outlaw, just being enough of a renegade, enough of a rebellious person in order to embrace Bitcoin in the first place, right? Yeah, Valley Girl. Sorry, Bitcoin Deb. I didn't mean to. Make fun of women in this case. So there you go. So Outlaw, hero, of course, a big one for Bitcoiners, which is pretty self-evident. But the last one, and this is a really important archetype, both in Jungian psychology and for Bitcoiners, which is just pleb, right? The average person is a major archetype. Now, one of the things that this means is, I mean, look at how my dad was a hero. He was a hero by just being there for his kids, being there for his family. That's it. It was that simple, right? Doing what he had to do, not worrying about the government, providing for his family, being there for them, right? You know how much time I had to my dad growing up? I never had any resentment. My dad wasn't there. I might have had resentment here and there that I had to pay everything myself. He never had money to help, but it never got to me, right? I was never like, it was not a hard pill to swallow. And there were plenty of opportunities for me to make money. I would only ever say it in those weak moments when you're being lazy, right? And I would say it to myself. But my dad got me set up and work when I was 12 years old. He gave me lawns in the neighborhood, helped me get them. So did my mother. I got a job in the same restaurant that my mom worked in from when I was 12, 13 years old. I was washing dishes, and I never stopped working from then on. And I had all kinds of tough jobs and crazy jobs and laborious jobs and physical jobs. But my dad knew that that wasn't sort of what I wanted, right? And I remember even one time, and he never forgot this, he was always impressed by this. And so when I was just before I started law school, and me going to law school was the happiest thing that ever happened to him anyway, right? Lots of fun things have happened since, but me going to law school was like the happiest he's ever been, right? Now, part of it started because when I got back from Korea and before I went to law school, I'd already been accepted. I just hadn't started. I was substitute teaching in my local high school. And my dad said, why don't you just do this for a job, kiddo? Like you're having a hard time. We'll see. I didn't know how to pay for law school yet and all this. And so he says, right, why don't you just do this? And I said, Dad, do you want me to hate my life? Right? Do you want me to hate my life? Do you want me to go be a shitty teacher and hate my life? Not no offending teachers, right? I had already been a teacher for years. I knew it wasn't for me. I have no problem doing it and was doing it for money the whole time. And I continued to do it while I went to law school. But, it wasn't going to be something that I was going to do. And that made him think. He said, wow, that's a pretty, well, I respect that. Like, if you're not going to be happy, you can't do it. And go out and find what you're going to do. And he knew law school was the right thing, right? So that's a really important archetype. And just being a pleb, just stacking sats, just protesting your government in this way, protesting the fusion of money and state the way plebs do, is our most important archetype, more than hero, more than any of these others. And in this case, just doing normal things. And my dad was a failure at a ton of things in life. I mean, he was a failure at a ton of things. He tried this, he tried that, it didn't work. But he never let it bother him. He never let it stop his enthusiasm from going into the next thing. And he never let it define him, right? It was a normal thing to fail at these things, but it never kept him from being there for his kids and being there for the people who needed him. And he did it right to the end of his life. I mean, I never had to explain to him what I needed help with. He would say, and it was always logistic stuff. I mean, he gave me 10 million rides in my life. And, I would explain to him, I'm coming through. And, to be the dad of a vagabond like myself is, before I had kids, I mean, I was all over the world all the time. I would pop in at night, leave the next day, no warning, no, I'm coming home, none of that, right? But I was lucky enough to have a million reunions with him at home, a million homecomings. And every time he was there and every time he would, even to this day, think, well, he might need someone to bring something here and the kids need someone to pick them up. And he was always there for that kind of stuff. But it's just average stuff, right? It's nothing special. But that's really what it comes down to, right? One of the things fiat has stolen, and the reason why you see this psychic breakdown of families and all that, it really is the missing dads. I mean, the missing dads have a huge part to play here. And there's more to it, but missing dads are a big part of it. That's why kids who have all this money are still fucked up and stupid and hate their parents, right? There is no trading time with your kids for money. It's just a shitty trade, and you can't get it back. You cannot get it back. And so as someone who did all these hard jobs for years, and my dad, like I said, picked me up from this job, picked me up from that. Here's my summer. And I was making good money by now. 1999, my summer, just as I'm starting school, my summer is, I work in a professional summer stock theater. We got kids running around. Working in a professional summer stock theater, which is only afternoons. So the plays would all happen at around 4:00. Donald Sutherland and all kinds of people would come in. It was a great theater. Prime ministers, Paul Martin in Canada was there all the time. Hydro-Quebec paid the bills because the chairman of Hydro was living in the town as well, so we never had to think about money. It's a beautiful summer stock theater. We brought all kinds of professional actors from Montreal. That was my night job. In the day, I had a million other jobs, and lawn work, helping this person, helping that person, helping all kinds of people. But I also had a job hiking in the mountains with school kids that would come through, and I would take them all up in the mountains. So I got a range of jobs here that are, 25 miles around my lake in all different directions. And I don't have a car. I don't have a license. There's no point. Like, my dad has one shitty car. I'm never going to borrow his car. I bike if I can everywhere. This guy drove me around all these things, helped me out with all of that stuff, and always knew that I wasn't going to continue working this way, right? Working like a crazy person. And I can still remember one of the proudest moments my dad ever had is that, all these jobs. And so I had some negotiating power, because if one wasn't going well, it didn't matter. I had so many others. But I remember it was a beautiful spring day, just at the beginning of the summer holiday. I just got back from college, and it was 20 something degrees Celsius. And I just said to the lady, I was cleaning up her property after spring, and I said, I'm not working today. It's too nice. And so I get home, and my dad says to me, good man, you took the day off work because it's beautiful. And you're like, yeah, so he had no problem saying that. Oh, these kids are playing craziness. So, this pleb thing of being happy with whatever job it is that you're doing and not letting that job be too stressful and become too much of a priority, so you can't enjoy a beautiful day or you can't enjoy your time with your family, right? It's just basic family stuff that we've forgotten because of time preference and whatever else, right? Let me just 1 second. There. They're not listening to me. They're all my kids' friends anyway. They all know me as a dad, so they're not taking it seriously. All right, let's see what people are saying here. That's the ultimate goal of Bitcoin. Yeah. To bring the essence of family to real definition by giving us something more valuable than Bitcoin, time. It's exactly it, Muslim Bitcoiner. That's exactly it, right? And again, my dad never owned an alarm clock. He didn't have Bitcoin in his life at the time, but he predicted where things were headed. He knew the cyclical nature of history. He's a big student of history. You can hear me fine. Good. Good. So he knew the cyclical nature of history, and that's why that sort of revolutionary thing that he did to bring me to the countryside and to grow up in that environment. Not I had the benefit of growing up with very wealthy people, very civilized people who will be happy for your success. It's something that I've noticed, that a lot of people, as I've become successful, people who weren't from that world, they don't always want you to be successful, by the way. Like people I went to law school with, when they find out you made money or this thing happened and Bitcoin, they're like, fucker, that's a bit of a something they didn't tell you, something that no one will tell you that it's going to be like that, but it is, it sucks. But there's an exception to that. People who were born with a lot of money, they're not really weirded out by money. And so these people are a little, and they bought Bitcoin in the early days because I told them and all that stuff. So there is no jealousy with these people, and I would never have had them in my life had my dad not calculated. I don't think that was necessarily his calculation. He just knew that country life was going to become a lot more beneficial than city life, and he was ahead of the game, right? This is a strange thing, that city life, being a financial engineer and being credentialed and being in fashion and all that stuff. My dad denied the fashion industry. He looked like a bum in his last years, right? But he was kind of a refugee of that fiat world and made it over. My dad was the first person, speaking again just of this pleb thing, and it's something I talk about all the time, about music being a type of drug, and that musicians are kind of drug dealers, and you got to be a little weary and careful of music. It was my dad who taught me that. My dad, who grew up in that era of music, already by the 80s and 90s was understanding that it was a scam and that it was creating all kinds of psychological effects that people didn't understand. It was a much more powerful persuasion thing than you knew. So already in the 90s, my dad was telling me in the 90s, don't listen to music. Like don't be like one of those teenagers who listens to music. It'll be trouble, right? No, he didn't say never listen to music. He didn't say music is bad. He didn't do anything like that. He loved music, right? In the car, driving, we used to listen to music. He taught me everything about rock and roll history. He loved music, right? But he was very, very aware and rejected and rebelled against that world that was itself a type of rebellion at the beginning, rock and roll, right? So he was able to perceive all of that stuff. And again, the only musicians he had time for were like Bob Dylan and that kind of stuff. So this idea here of just normal stuff that Bitcoiners do and think and engage in, like music denial, right? It's a weird thing, but it's part of what Bitcoiners offer the world, right? And it's part of what being just a pleb means, and it's one of the main archetypes here. And again, the thing that brings the archetype together is using your time in ways that don't feed the monster and create a better heaven on earth situation, right? So there you go. UTXO says tuning music to 440 hertz is a scam. It sure is. It sure is. It was Isaiah Jackson who taught me all about that. I didn't know. Dave Wilby, who knew my father? Who knew my father? Your father opted out. So did mine. You see it clear when they go. Yeah, it was by design, I think. Boomers that opted out spawned today's rebels. It's on us now. Yeah. So Dave Wilby was my friend in South Korea, and we lived there together. And Dave came up to my house probably that would have been 04, 05, just in the same time that I was describing when I'm just about to start law school. And he ended up spending a few days with my dad. And again, just like I mentioned earlier, I had tons of friends who would spend their time with my dad. And Dave Wilby was one of them. And I would come home and they would be hanging out and talking and all this kind of stuff. So it was another one, right? 2004. Yeah, it was Christmas 2004, right, Dave? Yeah, it was. Christmas 2004. Thanks, Nolan. Gotta go. Dinner must be served. See you at sunup. Indeed, I'll be back around. The greatest honor in life is remembrance in death, a wise man once told me. Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah. A child will always remember the effort, not so much the involvement. Yeah. 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 R.I.P. Father of the Count. God bless you. Thanks, my man. Hunter Biden's laptop says, from communist Canada. What a shithole. I think those fucking Canadian doctors killed him, by the way. The fucking vax and all that. He died of vax, basically. His heart was weak, so it's not just the vax, but that boomer idiot that my dad is. I've said enough nice things about him. He snuck a vax at Christmas time. My mom told me. Motherfucker. Took 2 last year, you know? Anyway, you can't get mad at it. The things that made them themselves, the things that made them them, you can't cut them in half. You can't split the baby. I lived in Montreal for the summer, likely when your dad was a window dresser. It was an amazing place for creative people. Yeah, he was from that whole world. No patriarchs without the plebs. Yeah. The House vetoed the FISA surveillance bill. Yeah, wow, amazing. So good to see you again. My dad also died of heart disease randomly in Kenya. Alcohol daily. Yeah, my dad had not been drinking alcohol at all, really, for the last, let's say, maybe. So he had a heart stint put in 2016. So he was down to very low amounts of alcohol from then on. Maybe 2 or 3 beers a week. But not more than that. When he lived here in Barbados, every now and again, he'd have a beer in the afternoon. But the alcohol, he kicked the alcoholism. Now, before that, he was not a hard liquor drinker. It was generally like a 6-pack of beer, but he'd make it last for the whole evening and be a little drunk, you know. Didn't do it in the morning or anything like that. I have zero doubt about the amazing life you and your family have because of your parents. Yeah, it really is. It really is, you know. I just came to show my support. Thanks, man. I didn't realize the pain of losing a father, but I know what it feels like to never have one. Yeah, no one, philosopher, artist, that can't be easy, man. I'd be nowhere without my dad, so no doubt about it. Good day, Habib. Chevy, what a Chad. Yeah, I think that came up when I was mentioning that he never even filed his taxes. I didn't even know he existed. Never. Love seeing you laughing and smiling, Noah. Thanks, Chevy. What a great show to honor the memory of your father. Yeah, I kind of had to. I don't think I could have gone without sharing with you guys. I've shared with a lot of friends who knew him and all that, but I just got to make sure everyone here knows that there's no Count BTC. I would not have found Bitcoin in 2012, 2013. I would not have been able to quit. Listen, man, I quit a job with a secretary, a fireplace, a couch in my office. And I quit all of that for no money. There was no job in Bitcoin. No one was paying me. Like, I just had to go out on my own and figure it out. And my dad was all for it. I mean, you know, a lot of other people, you're throwing away your law degree, you're throwing away all this stuff. You know, you have this great job, you know, stupid, dumb shit, dumb fiat, stupid shit. And he understood that. So and Bitcoin, you know, he still didn't quite trust me about Bitcoin right up until the end. He was telling me 2022, 2023, I bet you wish you'd have sold some, you know, bet you wouldn't have sold some. But the past few months watching it go up again really impressed him. I mean, he'd call me every day. He'd be like, wow, you know, like you knew, how'd you know? It's amazing, you know? And I said, Dad, we're going to win everything, right? He liked that thought. He really liked that thought. That was one of the favorite things he could think about. Wonderful origin story. Feels good, man. It does, yeah. Good evening from Puerto Rico. Heard of the loss, Nolan. My condolences. Thanks, Ben. Thanks a lot, Ben. No problem, Daniel. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening, guys. I appreciate it. It does me a great amount of good to tell these stories and speak well of them. No problem, guys. We're going to be okay. We're going to be okay.
Smoke's going down here.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, Cal, put it out. Don't worry. Put it out. It gotta go out. So, listening to Fatherhood while cooking my son scrambled eggs for breakfast. Great, Emily. Great. Yeah, he was a true altruist. No problem, Jason. Welcome back. I'm back. In my office, I have many catch the game last night NPCs. Then read my book. I'll tell you how to deal with them. There we go. Everyone's in the chat. We love it. All right. Let's see if anyone else is up there. There you go. All right, team. Well, the sunset came through a little bit. I wish you could see how beautiful it is right now. Wow. Let me see if I can't get it for you. No. I thought I could get more of it out of here, but it's right on the top of the water right now. Oh, let me go to the Bitcoin's pumping in honor of your dad. We love it. We're going to win for Pops. We're going to win. We're going to win. Busted live. Yeah, I got busted. We need another episode about mother. So I talked about the mother archetype. But we'll talk about it more. Oh, a bunch of comments here. Oh, hold on. The sun is setting. Yeah. Oh, look at all this. Okay, I missed all this stuff. Here. I think my dad and your dad would have gotten along great. So much of what you described is how my dad is. And he left England in the 60s to come to the States. Great. Yeah, that generation that sort of survived that stuff did really well, you know? Wonderful tribute to your father, bringing the tribe closer with this episode. Thank you, Nola. Thanks, Jocko. Thanks for everyone. Thanks for being here for this. This really means a lot to me. The sun is setting. Bitcoin is running. Fathers are beautiful. Peace. Indeed. Blaine Smith says, prayers and blessings to you and your family, Nolan. Appreciate your show so much every morning. Awesome. We're going to be back tomorrow morning, guys. Moscow time's going to be a little thin, though. I used it today. This has been so wonderful hearing about your dad. Thanks, Bitcoin Deb. Hard for sure. Lost my father 10 years ago. God bless you and your family. Yeah. We're going to be okay. It's getting easier. My father got me into gold as a child. More recently, it took me 2 years of daily conversations to get him into Bitcoin. It's not easy. Yeah, my dad was still like, my dad even at the end was like, BlackRock's gonna eat your fucking lunch, and you know what I mean. You guys are gonna get fucking pounded into the ground. It's okay. The one thing my dad fell for was the fiat scam. He was an immigrant who couldn't read and write in America and died a millionaire. My father died thinking that I was gambling with Bitcoin. Yeah. Many such cases. Yeah. Vaughn Ray says, we are lucky to have you. We all love you here in the best space on YouTube. I love to hear that. I love to hear that. We love it. Misty Nolan, so sorry for your loss. That's well. So I talked a bit about the mother archetype. I'll put it in the book though, for sure. This is great, Nolan. Thanks for sharing. We're gonna win for Pops, indeed. Bitcoin's pumping, and yeah, I read that one. Missy Nolan, hope you guys are all well. Praying for everyone and your father. That's Brandon. Brandon, who I got to. It's a Nolan eclipse. It's about to set. If you could, if it was perceiving correctly, you would see the actual sun. I wonder if I can. No. Well, once it gets a little less, you're going to see it go down. Once the shine comes off, right? It's a Nolan eclipse. Yeah, I got to hang out with Brandon quite a bit at Bitcoin 2023 in Miami. Brandon's a great guy. It does look cool. Yeah, it's a beautiful beach. Now I'm going to go look at what people are saying on Rumble, just because this was on my Rumble channel, and I love you guys on Rumble. I love Rumble. We love Rumble. Oh, it's down. Yeah, so that was the end of the sun. Now the whole sky is actually pinkish and red right now, and I wish you'd be able to get that. But that's okay. That is okay. All right, let's see what the folks is saying. Okay, good. No comments. That's fine. No live chat. Oh no, there is a huge live chat. What am I talking about? Hey, Nolan. Johnny Rico says. Lance says, good to see you again, Nolan. I've been looking for you for the last week. Yeah, I'm guessing you had a family event to take care of. I sure did. Yeah. I hope your Ramadan went well, Muslim Bitcoiner Lance 2002 says. Indeed. Must be a lot of fun there right now. Good points, all. Hey, you kids, get out of my yard. Yeah. Doing the dad thing, yeah. The human condition, ego-driven. That's changing for the better, in my opinion. Yeah. Just got COVID yesterday for the first time, Examari says. Just bad headaches and sore muscles. That's bad enough to shut down the world. Yeah, it was. I had it recently, and it was terrible. Again, I've had it 4 or 5 times now. Johnny says, I lost my dad at 5. Wow, Johnny. I can't imagine. I always wondered what it would have been, but you had a great stepdad. Great news, Johnny. Yeah, I don't like, again, I think we're going to have a big, just hold this in your mind for a second. As Bitcoiners, because one of the things that fiat has done is destroy the family unit and rip apart motherhood and rip apart fatherhood and create all these troubles, we're going to have a lot of remedial fathering going on, in the same way that my dad was sort of a father figure to a lot of people whose dads got sucked in by the fiat scam. I think a lot of us Bitcoiners are going to have jobs within our own communities and within our own spaces in order to perpetuate this lack of father thing. We got to fill the void. It's magic thinking that fathers are just going to appear and everyone's going to be a better father. It's not going to be that way, right? There's a lot we need to do to get to that point. There's a lot of supplemental fathering we're all going to have to do. I mean, all of us, right? And in our own communities, in the same way that the pleb archetype is important, that's one of the things that's important, that we do these community things, normal things, looking out for your neighbors, looking out for the people in your town, looking out for someone who doesn't have a good father and is not instructing them and helping them and guiding them, right? There's a lot of room for us to operate there. And just look at the amount of single mothers there are, right? It's a disaster. So we need this fatherhood archetype to be fully expressed for us to win. And we need to scale fatherhood, more or less, right? We need to scale fatherhood. Not easy. But the whole thing of like 2 kids, 1 father, that's not scaling. We don't have enough, right? We got too many kids. We wish we had more kids. We also have a problem with lack of kids, but we're also missing some fathers. So we got to scale it. Peak Memetic says, good to see you back, Nolan. Sorry about your dad. May he rest in peace. Yeah, he must have been a great father. He sure was. My father taught me to work hard and save. Well, that's still a good East Side Tony. Again, I'm kind of bragging right now about my dad. He had a short temper. He had bad qualities too, right? Never a crazy short temper, no hitting or anything like that. There was no violence in the house, nothing like that. But, he could be in a bad mood for no reason. He could be cranky. He had all these things. Anyone who's drinking, it can get sketchy, right? So he definitely had that stuff. So, not perfect, not perfect. We love him. We love him, perfectly, but not perfect. All flawed. Connector says, I never, the energy / wellness / boost from an encouraging father is something I'll never fully know, but can hint at it in what you're sharing. Blessings. Yes, Connector. I am, I feel, and I've known it for a long time. This is not like I didn't realize this recently. I sort of knew already as a teenager that the advantages that I had came from the dad who was so involved and shared with me, the ability to be a good conversationalist, a good storyteller. My dad was a great storyteller. I got all that from him, right? Most of what you see here in the breakup, most of what you see comes from skills that I learned from him, right? Most of it. So the creativity, him, right? That's the fact. Remember the whiteboards I made all the time, all the drawing. That's him, right? That's him. He had one of the best calligraphists you're ever going to meet, like bubble letters and things like that. He did them for the signs for the windows. He did all his signs like sale 70% off. He'd always hand paint them. This was before digital printing, right? So he'd hand paint all this stuff, and it was gorgeous. It was all one of a kind, unique. He had a real good way of numbers and letters. Beautiful. Right? I was forced to coach Little League once. One of the things that I learned was that it gave me a great source of pride teaching young children how to become well-rounded young adults. Yeah, I bet you that was funny, Side Tony. It was always my dream to play in U.S. Little Leagues because we're okay in Canada, but longer season down in the States. So there you go. Longer season, right? All right, folks, we're almost done here. I appreciate everyone's time. I'm appreciative that y'all came to hear these stories. We got over 400 people on the YouTube and the Twitter. I don't know how many are over on Rumble. This thing never counts Rumble. Got a good crowd over on Rumble. We got 40 people over on Rumble still. So very big crowd, very excellent. Did you play hockey? My brother did. So there's another thing my dad did. A little against the grain. My brother was, so my dad is a huge hockey fan. And weirdly, here's another cool thing about my dad. He had a weird simulation wink that all of the coaches of the Montreal Canadiens somehow in his life ended up being friends or part of his life. It's crazy. Only starting in 1980, Bob Barry, who was the early 80s coach, was the rented summer house to my family, not my father. But the reason I live in the town I live in, Brome Lake in Quebec, was because the Barry family had a big estate and they rented a house to my grandparents my whole life. And that's how my dad knew about Knowlton, Brome Lake in the first place. So Bob Barry was the Montreal Canadiens coach. He became a coach of the St. Louis Blues. And this was sort of a claim to fame when I was a kid. If you're not a hockey fan, you won't know this. But in 1993, the year Montreal won the Stanley Cup, the last time any Canadian team won, the St. Louis Blues and the Toronto Maple Leafs were in the playoffs to get to the Stanley Cup. And it went to a game 7. So a one game playoff, right? Game 7, winner take all. Bob Barry, before this game, called my dad. I remember it. Like the coach of a major hockey team before the game 7 calls my dad. And he's like, yeah, man, like, what do you think? So anyway, one reason why people would call my dad is because my brother is one of the greatest hockey players going. He should have been in the NHL. I mean, he was incredibly good, right? The current general manager of the Montreal Canadiens, Kent Hughes, played his whole life with my brother in hockey. They were like a top line that won the Quebec Pee Wee tournament together. They were all the Montreal Canadiens players were their kids played on that team if they were the right age. So Larry Robinson and my dad were good friends. Bob Gainey and my dad were good friends because their kids, Bob Gainey, no, but Larry Robinson's son is the same age as my brother. They played together. Larry would, all the other dads would want to hang out with Larry, but Larry wanted to talk to my dad because of my brother. So as I said, Kent Hughes, who became a huge agent, played with my brother his whole childhood, right? But then it gets better. Pat Burns, the coach through the late 80s and early 90s, lived in my hometown. Pat Burns used to drive me around on the back of his motorbike in that bar that I explained that I used to work at. So he was the coach of both the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Boston Bruins, and first the Montreal Canadiens. He was a cop. He was a former cop from Ottawa. And he was hilarious. So he'd throw me on his Harley, drive me drunk all around town. He was going to drive me to my prom. So just a hilarious guy. And then, yeah, Pat Burns was very cool. Yeah, he was a very cool guy. Very, very cool. He all summer, I'd serve him every night in the bar, all the time. You know, in Quebec, we can go. I worked in the bar late at night and closed the bar when I was 15, 16 years old. I wasn't even technically old enough to be in there to drink, but, you know, I was fine. So, and then when I worked in the Senate, I worked with Jacques Demers. And so I was very close with Jacques Demers, talked to him all the time. He was the coach in that 93 season. So weirdly, he had all these connections. So my brother, really, he had too many operations on his shoulder in the end, physically couldn't do it. But my dad, after going through that whole experience of hockey, now there's a 9-year difference between me and my brother. Now, I started in hockey as a kid. My dad put me in, but right away saw I didn't love it and was like, I'm not going through this whole thing again, right? Unless he loves it like my brother did. I'll just play with him and we'll go on the rink. And so I'm a good hockey player. I follow hockey. I can keep up. I can play on shinny rinks. I played with Dave Wilby in the shinny rinks in Dundas and Spadina. I've played all over, you know, anywhere I go, I can play some hockey. But my dad understood right away. And so what did he get me into instead? Skiing. You know how much better skiing was for my life? You know how much more fun and how much more exciting skiing was growing up as a kid and being in a ski region, and all my friends were always there, and I could have this great social life and learn a sport. And in the end, as I got older, being a teenager and all that, and then going into college, I went to college in the French Alps and got to ski in the Alps. And now when you're fitting in with all of these rich French Europeans who all know how to ski, it's a very good thing that you know how, right? They don't care about hockey over there. So it was the right lessons for me anyway. So we love hockey. My father loves hockey. He was watching hockey to the last night of his life. Big Habs fan, but never let me take it too seriously as a fan. Always told me, you know, if I was young and the Habs lost and I was bummed out, you know, he'd get mad at stuff like that, right? Not failing a test, but like, you're letting hockey determine your mood. Like, what are you talking about? Right? Don't do that. So he was way ahead of that. It never bugged him if they lost or anything like that. So it was very cool. I had no clue ice skating was for girls. In my 20s, I took up playing hockey here in California because I didn't know how to ice skate and wanted a challenge. Yeah. There you go. All right, team. It's getting a bit dark here. I hoped you would get more of a sunset effect. It never really happens. Huh? It never really happened, but that's okay. It's still pretty beautiful back there. It's getting dark here. Thanks for coming, everyone. I really appreciate it. I'm going to finish my beer, and I shall see you all tomorrow morning for a regular episode of The Breakup. We'll be doing maybe a limited Moscow time. Maybe I'll go into the back catalog and see what I missed. But we should have some good stories to talk about. So I'll see you all then. Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. I love you, Dad, and I'm glad we got to do this. Peace.